The president has had a very bad past few days. The deal he promised that was just minutes from being done with Iran, and oil prices were dropping, and his friends were saying he deserved the Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, turns out none of that was going to happen, and now he's just giving up. Not one, but two different judges have taken aim at his $1.8 billion slush fund to pay his most loyal and violent allies, and his deal that would just let him do tax crime. Republicans in the Senate are revolting against that slush fund, so the DOJ is now backing off the money, but not the let him do crime part. Oh, and his name has to come off the Kennedy Center. His physical got released under the cover of night on a Friday, and it's got issues. His DHS secretary won't leave him alone about a very dumb idea to close international travel just ahead of the World Cup. And he may have illegally appointed a new acting director of national intelligence whose background is in tearing down abandoned homes in Detroit, not, intelligence. We're going to hit most of that today, but mainly the stuff about the courts stepping in on that $2 billion deal because of all the things that corruption experts have been pointing to in this administration. This is the thing that has broken through with voters and Republican leaders the most because, frankly, it is just the most nakedly stupid. It's Tuesday, June 2nd, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Hermes. Before we dive into the meaty stuff about the slush fund deal, let's talk about the breaking news from this morning. It's been about a week and a half since Tulsi Gabbard announced that she would have to be resigning from her job as the director of the Office of National Intelligence because her husband has bone cancer. Trump announced on Truth Social today that he would be appointing a man named Bill Pulte to be the acting DNI. If you don't know what the Director of National Intelligence, or DNI, is, they're the supervisor across 18 different intelligence agencies, including the CIA, parts of Homeland Security, the State Department, the NSA, FBI, DEA, and a whole bunch of other acronyms that would make a bowl of alphabet soup jealous. Now, while the DNI doesn't have the authority to authorize covert missions or things like wiretapping, they are responsible for making sure those programs run smoothly and then reporting about those to the president. It is an incredibly influential and powerful position because if the DNI says a particular mission or agency or person within that agency isn't doing a very good job or it isn't going very well, that could lead to major shakeups. So the person who's in that job really matters. Okay, back to the new guy, Pulte. Bill Pulte is his name. He is not a national security or intelligence expert. Bill Pulte is a private equity guy who made a bunch of money in Michigan and then started a company that became a nonprofit that tore down abandoned homes in Detroit that the city then took over in around 2014. Now, as someone who lives in Detroit right now, even though I wasn't here when he was operating, apparently that organization did a pretty good job at that. Pulte then got linked up in MAGA politics over the last 10 years and then rose through the ranks to become the director of the U.S. Federal Housing Program and then last March just appointed himself head of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which dole out housing loans. He was the guy behind the absolutely harebrained scheme last year of issuing 50-year mortgages that economists said would just break the housing market. But most importantly to Trump, he was the architect of the schemes that were accusing some of Trump's political enemies of mortgage fraud. Some of those enemies included California Senator Adam Schiff, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook. It's also worth noting that the same kinds of things that Pulte was accusing them of, Trump himself has admitting to doing to his own properties, but whatever, I guess. All of those cases were dismissed. The DOJ then launched an investigation into Pulte for the Schiff case, and the Government Accountability Office launched an investigation into the James case in New York, both for wrongdoing on Pulte's part. But Trump doesn't care about any of that because allowing Pulte to be in charge more or less of the intelligence community overall would mean that spy agencies could be used against Trump's domestic enemies more efficiently. But there are some very big buts here. Right now, it seems like Pulte has been appointed as acting DNI illegally. Under the law, the DNI has to have extensive experience in national security, which he does not. Two different looks into whether and how qualifications apply to acting roles, both by Trump's first administration and then a Congressional Research Service review from 2021, which are the people who do research for members of Congress, found that yes, what applies to actual nominees or appointees to any given role also applies to a acting appointee. So in this case, that would be the people that Trump appoints to be acting whatevers in whatever he appoints them to. Tulsi Gabbard doesn't officially leave until June 30th, so there's a lot of room for things to change here, and it could because Senate Republicans are not happy about this pick. They're not happy with Trump in general right now, so we will wait and see what happens and how important it is for Pulte to be in this position to Trump versus other things that are happening. All right, let's move on to Iran. Last week, Thursday, I talked about how the president and other outlets like Axios were saying we were maybe days away from a deal being signed. The president had skipped his own son's wedding the weekend before, seemingly suggesting that it was because of peace talks. Well, nope. The entire negotiations seem to have come crashing down over this weekend, and Iran and the U.S. have continued to exchange fire. Again, we're still in a ceasefire, according to the administration, which that word has no meaning now. And most legal experts at this point say we're just openly in an illegal conflict because Trump hasn't gotten any approval from Congress to have the blockade remain in the Strait of Hormuz or, to be blowing Iranian missiles or drones out of the sky. Not that we can let our ships or troops get hit by these things. It's just, our ships and our troops are just in a position to be shot at without the congressional or constitutional authority to be there. On top of that, Israel started bombing Lebanon again, continuing its invasion of that country, which, according to a story from Axios, Trump shouted at Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over the phone this weekend, and sorry for the language here if you're not into swearing, but Trump said, "You're fucking crazy. What the fuck are you doing? You'd be in prison if it weren't for me. I'm saving your ass. Everybody hates you now. Everybody hates Israel because of this." The president on that is correct, and seems to be coming around to the idea that he was tricked into a conflict with Iran by some flashy PowerPoints and appeals to his ego about Venezuela. And because of the strikes on Lebanon and their ability to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed, Iran just walked away from negotiations yesterday, according to their own state media. And when he was asked about this by CNBC, Trump said, quote, "I don't care if they're over. Honestly, I really don't care. I couldn't care less." And then said he thought that the peace talks to avoid a nuclear Iran, which in his own words was about saving the world. He said, "I thought they started to get very boring." And this is a thing that Trump does when he loses. One of his biographers, Michael Wolff, who I've talked about before on this show, that I've got my own misgivings about, but he is one of the very few people who has had as much access to Trump and his orbit as anyone. He said this about what Trump is actually saying when he says, "I don't care."
I think this has actually a very specific meaning. It's "I don't care" has to do with his anger and contempt when he's held to account. When the rules of gravity apply to him. Mm-hmm. When actions have consequences that he can't fix. So really, "I don't care" is saying basically, fuck you.
So again, it's Michael Wolff. Take anything he says with a grain of salt, but this is sort of a pattern with Trump over the course of his life. When he doesn't get his way, if he can't spin a loss into a win, he just takes his ball and tries to go home. It's a lot harder when that thing is the prospect of nuclear war. But then today, Trump said on Truth Social, never mind. The Iranians never stopped talking, and they had discussions today, even with the U.S., which the Iranians haven't verified at this point. And really, I'm just not inclined to believe something the president is posting when it comes to Iran, because so many of the things he's been saying on this specifically just have not turned out to be true. In the meantime, oil executives say that global inventories of oil are reaching a breaking point low, even as the U.S. has been quietly releasing bits of our strategic petroleum reserves, the thing that we keep on hand for national emergencies. So even though the price of oil hit like $94 a barrel last week, oil executives think we could hit somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 to $160 per barrel in the next few weeks, which would send the national price of a gallon of gas on average to around $6, more with tax, And in states like California or higher population states where the demand is higher, we would quickly be approaching that driving cutoff price where people would just stop driving altogether. That's about $7.40 a gallon, maybe as soon as the 4th of July, but almost certainly by this summer if these executives are right. So we could very much be in for a bumpy summer here if Trump does just say, I don't care, and walks away. Okay, I'm going to skip over the details of the president's physical here. If you want those, I talked about them on my social media pages, Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, Grant_Hermes on everything else. I'm going a bit long on this stuff right now, and I want to get to these other things. We're going to take a quick break here, and when we come back, Trump's slush fund is melting. I want to talk to you about sleep. Because if you've been following this show, you know the news cycle has been absolutely unhinged. And if the news cycle isn't going to be good to you, your sleep cycle should be. And that starts with the right fabric. And it's why this episode is brought to you by Cozy Earth. Here's the thing. Summer is here and it is hot. You're already lying awake at 2 a.m. thinking about the headlines, your deadlines, that weird thing you said at work. The last thing you need is to also be sweating through your sheets like you're having a fever dream. That is where Cozy Earth comes in. Bamboo sheets are legitimately temperature regulating, meaning they keep you cool when it's hot and warm when it's not. I know that sounds like marketing speak, but it is just how bamboo works. It breathes. Your polyester blend from 5 years ago, it does not breathe. It traps heat. It is not your friend. They also have bamboo pajamas, which make you wonder why you ever wore anything else to bed. And when I wake up, I put on their new brushed bamboo joggers that are soft in a way that feels almost unfair to the rest of my clothes. Look, the world is a lot right now, and you deserve one thing, at least, that just works. Cozy Earth is that thing. You can go to CozyEarth.com and use the code MIMS25 at checkout for 30% off. And just a heads up, when you use the code, Make It Make Sense gets a cut of that sale, which helps this show keep going. So you're sleeping better and you're supporting independent journalism, which is, what I call a win-win. Again, the code is MIMS25 at CozyEarth.com. All right, let's get back to the show. Late last week, the president got some bad news about his $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund and his immunity deal with the DOJ and IRS following his $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS, which was effectively against himself. Really quickly on that case, just for a background for you, Trump accused the IRS of leaking his tax returns in 2018. So during his first term, the IRS did not leak them. A contractor did, and is serving time in prison for that. But Trump the man sued the IRS, which Trump the president controls. Anyway, the judge in that case was working to figure out if the lawsuit was even legal under something known as adverse or controversy, which is a principle that prevents people from suing themselves. But before she could rule on that, the DOJ and Trump settled out of court, despite the fact the IRS had documents ready to go saying they could fight Trump in court and likely win. Neither Trump nor the DOJ filed the settlement documents with the court. Not necessarily like a legal no-no, but it's not good form. And what came out of this settlement was, first, that $1.8 billion anti-weaponization fund, or slush fund. The DOJ said it was going to be filling with money from its own congressionally designated settlement fund, which the DOJ normally uses to pay out actual settlements for things like civil rights violations. And instead, that money would go to pay Trump loyalists and potentially insurrectionists who claimed they were targeted by the Biden administration. And then just a day later, the DOJ dropped an amendment to that settlement that essentially said that Trump, his organization, his businesses, and thus his family, can't be targeted by the DOJ or IRS for tax crimes, certainly past tax crimes or pending investigations, and quite possibly unlimited immunity from being investigated or audited by the IRS forever. The entire thing, from top to bottom, for legal and ethics experts, stunk. So, late last week, 2 judges intervened. First, a judge in Virginia heard a case filed by former federal prosecutor Andrew Floyd, along with several other former U.S. attorneys. Federal prosecutors and U.S. attorneys, same job, just 2 names for the same job. Anyway, they said the $1.8 billion settlement had no basis in law or really reality, and also said it was a violation of First Amendment and equal rights protections, saying the anti-weaponization fund is available only to claimants who assert that they were targeted by Democratic administrations, and that neither the First Amendment nor the equal protection guarantee of our Constitution countenance such blatant partiality. In legal speak, that means that the Constitution doesn't differentiate between parties, only whether your rights are violated. The judge in Virginia agreed, at least with what they were saying, that it was compelling enough that they had to get to the bottom of it, and said that none of the $1.776 billion can get paid out until things get figured out. And then also on Friday, a judge in Miami, so Trump's backyard, reopened the entire IRS lawsuit case after 35 former federal judges filed a motion in that case saying the settlement is a product of collusion and is itself a fraud on the court. They said that was the case because Trump was essentially suing himself here, but also because what Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche and Trump's personal attorneys were arguing in court didn't match what reporting about what was happening inside the Trump administration was, and the fact that DOJ attorneys weren't honest with the judge in the original case about that. They said all of that was tantamount to fraud. The judge agreed and said Trump can file again by June 12th, and the judges can join back in on the case again on June 19th. Now that brings us to yesterday, Monday, when the DOJ out of nowhere said it would be complying with the judge in Virginia's order not to give any payouts from the slush fund, which, on one hand, yeah, a judge ordered it. You can't give any money out now unless you want to have a really bad time. On the other hand, what it means is that all of the people loyal to Trump, who thought they were getting something in return for their loyalty, finally for a lot of them, now aren't, at least temporarily, but potentially not ever. And again, at least temporarily, it's Trump who makes sure that he gets what he wants, which is this unheard of immunity deal. And it's the kind of thing that people notice. No one likes to be made a fool of, especially when there's money on the line. And that's what just happened here. The DOJ didn't fight for these Trump supporters looking for a chunk of this settlement money. After months of saying these judges are corrupt and they should be fought tooth and nail, Todd Blanche didn't do that. What he did do was make damn sure that Donald Trump's do crime deal stayed in place. And Republicans in the Senate took note. They are back this week after a 10-day, let's call it wildcat strike. They walked off the job over the slush fund deal without voting on a $70 billion funding bill to further fund ICE and other parts of DHS. And now they're in a standoff over the slush fund or whether or not the president wants to continue doing his immigration plans. It's causing such a problem that there's a new group of senators that have banded together. Some, like former leader Mitch McConnell, who are retiring, but also senators that Trump personally ousted in the primaries, like Texas Senator John Cornyn or Louisiana's Bill Cassidy, who are forming what's being loosely called a wounded bear caucus, and not in a, lumbering to their deaths kind of way, in a way that's like wounded bears are their most dangerous because they're hurt and they'll lash out. A GOP staffer told the Wall Street Journal that the mood was one of raw fury at President Trump, and that is a big problem for the president with about a month to go before the summer recess here, and what is really the last chance for the Republican Party to score a legislative victory before the midterms, though when Trump was asked about the midterms last week, he said, "I don't care about them," and we all know what that means. All right. That is it for today's episode. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where this week's Things You Forgot from Civics class is all about whether or not we as voters have a right to the president's health records and how much of that should we actually know. There's a debate over this, and my knee-jerk instinct to this might actually not be the right one, and yours might not be either. It's another one of these things that I found out to be really interesting, and it's more complicated than it seems. That is just for paid subscribers who get access to that and weekly original reporting for just $5 a month. As always, you can share the show on social media. Tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.